Hello, everybody. Today we're going to talk about obedience, and we're going to be answering two imperative questions regarding obedience. Number one, why do people obey? Why are we predisposed to obey others of authority, of perceived authority, rather? And number two, how do we obey? What are the causal patterns of behavior that cause us to obey and remain obedient? Okay, so to begin, we obey because we have a need for order. Order is crucial for our lives because it activates this thing known as cognitive closure. Cognitive closure is obviously related to order, but it suppresses all the ambiguity, confusion, uncertainty, and equivocal thoughts that we have in our heads. And because these thoughts of uncertainty can often lead to anxiety. And so cognitive closure directly offsets that. And how do we attain this cognitive closure? Well, authority is one of the main ways to get rid of this. And so that's why we obey, actually. One of the reasons is because we want clarity. We want structure. We want patterns of sequences within our lives that make sense and are predictable and that lead us somewhere that we know and are safe and comfortable with. And so we obey because we need order, we need cognitive closure, and we need structure in our lives. But why do we need all those things? Well, we can get very deep with this and quite metaphysical, but the main reason is to simply mitigate suffering as much as we can. And so that's going to be a common theme in this video, is the mitigation of suffering through obedience. So the second reason of why we need to obey is a need for identity. We're all social creatures with different archetypes, personalities, temperaments, and whatnot. And so we need a way to combine that, to fuse that together in a cohesive manner. And identity, the combination of identity, the coherence of identity is one way to do that. We not only obey authority figures or individual people, but we obey societal concepts. We obey the invisible threads of the societal hierarchy. We obey the rules, the unspoken rules of the community, society, or group that we're a part of. And why is that? It's because we have a need. We have a primordial need to fit in, to be seen, to be reinforced, to be justified within this world. Because what are the consequences of not? Well, it's isolation, loneliness, depression, complete and utter neurotic attitudes. And of course, we want to mitigate suffering. And that's one way to do so, is obeying these underlying structures of society. The third reason of why we obey so much is because we have a need to transcend. You see, we all want to go on an adventure. We're all spiritual creatures in some way. We all want to be above ourselves. We all want to leave a legacy, move mountains, create fantastical enterprises, pursue the sublime, understand all the beauty and reverence in this world. And in order to do that, we have to have an obedient attitude towards the people that can lead us to that adventure. Imagine this, right? You're just laying down before bed and someone or something offers you to go on an adventure of the lifetime. And this adventure is exactly what you've been desiring. It aligns with your values, ethics, beliefs, everything, your desires, your greatest desires, the pinnacle of them, rather. Of course, you're going to go on this adventure. And because you're on this adventure, you have people that lead you. And these are the people that you obey. Because you know that vision that they have, or that road that they embarked on, is the same exact path you want to embark on. And it's interesting because the authority figure can't completely give you the exact tools and methodologies to accomplish and to embark on the path. They have to give you enough, but it has to be ambiguous enough, right? I know I sound a little contradictory, but it's really not. You see, in order for the obedience to occur, the authority figure needs to provide the requisite tools to encapsulate the vision, but the vision has to be unpredictable and chaotic on its own. Because it can't be one or the other. It has to be a balance, and that balance is seductive. That balance is why we obey. Because yes, we want that order and clarity and structure of, okay, what am I getting myself into? But that pathway is uncertain. And there's beauty in that. There's beauty in being led to something uncertain. And that's why people obey so much. Now, I'm not saying one is correct, and oftentimes it can be incorrect or dangerous, but it's a very lucrative and seductive thing to embark on. Okay, so now we're going to answer the question of how we obey. What are the common behavioral patterns that cause us to obey, right? Through a perceived authority. So, the number one way is through behavioral architecture. The person with authority can engineer human behavior, and they often do through through a myriad of tactics and methods. But before we get into how they do it, we have to understand how they let it happen or how we let it happen. So number one is everyone goes through this thing known as cognitive load reduction. We talked about cognitive closure, but now we're going to talk about cognitive load reduction. So cognitive closure, right, just for clarity, is having ambiguous, uncertain, and ambivalent thoughts that lead to anxiety and crippling uncertainty. Where cognitive load is just overwhelmingness. It's just, I don't know what to do, and it leads to complete indecisiveness, and it's very, very difficult and hard on a human psyche. And so what happens is we do this thing called trust heuristics. So when somebody or someone starts acting confident, they generate feelings of warmth, gentleness, ease, competence. They envelop a certain skill that you desire or value so much, or an ethic. We take a mental shortcut and automatically perceive that person as a person of authority. And since we want less of a cognitive load, we allow that person to help and guide us and make decisions for us. We are obedient to them because they have cultivated the path for us. And then when we give them this perceived authority, what often happens is they deploy verbal and moral framing. So they'll use sanctimonious diction, for example, to guide and, again, engineer your behavior. So, for example, if you're obeying a religious institute, right, the religious leader may use doctrine. They may use the primary religious codes to direct your behavior. And this is very powerful because you perceive the authority figure as a reflection of the divine, but also a reflection of your own internal states and desires, because you're giving that authority for a certain reason, whether it's for order, clarity, or for an adventure, or for some sort of mitigation of suffering. So they'll subtly align their beliefs or what they want you to do with your beliefs, with your idea and perceptions of the world. And these subtle sort of behavioral tips that they give you and map out, it goes through a process known as gradual rationalization. So this is very dangerous. So gradual rationalization is a way for our mind to completely thwart cognitive dissonance, which is probably the most powerful indicator of human malleability, right? If you go after somebody's cognitive dissonance, you can basically control that person. So it's very dangerous. And so what happens is, through gradual rationalization, you slowly but surely start obeying greater and greater tasks, greater and greater acts of service that you provide for them. And again, it's very dangerous because what'll happen is you'll have this internal belief that co-aligns with the person, that co-aligns with the institute, for example. And they'll ask you or tell you to do something very minute, but that minute and small thing will compound into something even greater. And all of a sudden you'll be doing exceptional things, exceptional in a negative way. And that's, you have to be careful about. You have to be careful, and you have to make sure your mind is metacognitive enough where you can realize the gradual realization itself from expanding. And finally, how others make us obey is this concept I call just the peak of human value. So what is the peak of human value, if you will? The peak of human value is where you project your greatest, most desirable value upon another person that represents that value to its utmost, to its absolute peak. So for example, if you value intelligence the most, and you find somebody that you deem to be one of or the most smartest person that you know of, well, through trust heuristics, there's automatic obedience or perceived authority that leads to obedience within that person, because we projected this fantastical idea onto them. And all of a sudden, it leads to symbol authority. So now, right, our perceived value is, our hierarchy of value is intelligence, and we found that with someone else. So now we start symbolizing their authority over us, or rather their value of intelligence over us, which leads to that authority. And it can be in how they dress, their eloquence of speech, their logical cohesion, their wisdom even, and their general insights of what they can provide you. How they sort of untangle the webs of your own psyche, of your own heart, of your own emotional states. And because they're so charismatic, it actually leads to an emotional connection. Because charisma, there was a study on this, charisma actually leads to emotional connection. It leads to an emotional response to that very person. And that can be very dangerous, and you can be very susceptible to obedience with that. What ends up happening is we deify that person. Because we deified, we have complete reverence for intelligence, for example, right? Or it can be beauty, it can be looks, it can be virtue, it can be whatever you value the most. Because that very thing is already deified through our own self-perceptions. But now it's manifested through somebody else. And because it's manifested through somebody else, we deify that person as well, which is a very strange but common cognitive bias that we often employ. What I will say is probably the most dangerous and effective method to remain and to cause the obedience is creating awe. Creating awe within somebody. Creating awe requires a lot of charisma, fervor, candor, and proper diction and cohesive diction. But it's extremely, extremely potent when it does occur. Because when you create awe within somebody, they feel small, they feel more humble, and they feel a sense of reverence towards you, or towards the feelings of awe that you created. And through this, creates absolute obedience.